1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23 in the New King James Version. For though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I become as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I become as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might be all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker of it with you.
Good morning. It is great to see everyone. What a beautiful day. What a blessing to be together. I want to echo, and I'm so glad to hear our elders give the challenge. I've heard more than one individual. I just can't stand to look at the images, but we can't turn away. There are so many in need, and it is so great to be a part of an incredibly organized and functional organization as known as the Disaster Relief Network within our fellowship. They have been known over the last several years as one of the first individuals and one of the most organized groups that hits any disaster group, and it is just going to be a great blessing to participate with them next week. I also bring greetings back from the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina. Zachary and Bethany Smith, who are now joined in holy matrimony. Pat and Joyce were there. Just think of Pat and Joyce. Pat and Joyce didn't make it to the ceremony. There were some directional challenges, but they did make it to the reception afterward, but everybody's safe, but I just bring you greetings back from them. Many of you are mindful of them in prayer and appreciate so much what was done there. This is an advertisement for the next 60 seconds. Wednesday night beginning in September. I'm back in the Wednesday night class, so appreciate Daryl and others who stepped in during the summer and allowed me to do several of the things the elders allow me to do during the summer, and it's been such a blessing. Get to be back. There's several dear friends of both mine and Caleb's who have written a study called One Word. And what it literally does is focuses each week on a significant word in Scripture. And that is going to be the plan as on Wednesday night. And it is an incredibly neat study. One significant word from the Bible each week that we'll focus on and practically look at how that I can take that word and make a difference not only in my life but in the lives of all the folks around me. So that's Wednesday night. So please make your plans now to be a part of that significant study together. All things to all men, that I might save some. We live in a culturally diverse world. We live in a communication challenged because of the diversity of our backgrounds, our experiences, our education levels, socioeconomic status, racial struggles, all of those of which shouldn't be a disparity. But we live in a world that makes it very difficult for us to be simply Christian and strive to the best of our ability to do what is best for mankind as Christ did when he walked for 3 simple years on this earth. So how in the world do I do what he did while he was here in this crazy, mixed up, difficult world? I think Paul summed it up in 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. Appreciate Doug reading that. I wish we had time to read the entirety of the chapter. I'm going to read several sections of it if you look back in chapter 9, beginning in verse 1, because Paul will share a lot about himself and the struggle that he has. And there's a key phrase. He says, I'm free from all men. What in the world does that mean? Free from all men. Well, it depends on your perspective. In America today, if I would say that, it means I'm free to do whatever I want to, which is a misnomer. I'm not free to do whatever I want to. That's chaos. I'm free to do those things that I am allowed to do that are right for me to do. But he says, I'm free from all men. What, free from an obligation to all men? Well, that's not what he's talking about, because Paul will say, I'm obligated to all men. That is one of the things he's talking about. So I'm not free from an obligation. What am I free from? 1 Corinthians chapter 9, if you'll look for just a few minutes, time's not going to allow us to read a lot of it, but he says in the very first verse, am I not an apostle? Why would Paul feel the need to declare his pedigree? Because several folks didn't think he was worthy to be called an apostle. He's a murderer. We all know who Paul is. He is a former Jew. And they would put former in quotations going, we know that's not his motivation. He's sly. He's incredibly intelligent. He's infiltrating this new group, this new Christian way, so that he can destroy it. He's not one of us claiming to be an apostle. Am I not free? Well, Paul, yes, in fact, you'll use your credibility as a Roman citizen to declare your potential freedom, because you'll declare, I was born a Roman. I didn't buy it. And all of this, there are other passages where he verifies all of this. Won't have time to look at it. Then he says, have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Why in the world would he have to make that statement of linking him with Jesus on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9 when he's going with the intent purpose of destroying Christianity? He's got letters in his hand to put people in prison. Are you not my work in the Lord? Now he transitions into a very personal. I'm not free from my responsibility to you. I'm not free because I'm a servant to Jesus Christ. What is this great freedom? I'm free from all men. Here I think, and if you'll allow me, he says next, if I am not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me is this. Paul was a lawyer, trained, and so he's establishing his case. Verse 3, my defense to those who examine me is this. Do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife? So also the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas or Peter. Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? Whoever goes to war at his own expense, who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit, or who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? Do I say these things as a mere man, or does not the law say the same also? It is written, the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the corn. Is it oxen God is concerned about? He says, I'll be an ox if you want me to be, but I'm free to do what the law has allowed me to do. That's genuine freedom. I'm free from all men when I'm doing simply what I'm supposed to do. That sets me free. That puts me in a situation that I can do as I choose because my choices are right. Now, Paul's not claiming perfection here. He'll go through that in many other texts. He says, I'm just a mere man. But my attempt, my desire is to please God. And as a result of that, I'm going to end up pleasing some. And then his major argument here is even saving some. See, Paul's going to make an argument that's one, and it's really not popular this time of year, especially with college football season starting. To win, I must lose. Nobody likes to lose. Several of you, I heard talking this morning because several of you walked in here this morning, your team lost yesterday. Some of you, your team won. Now that is just a football deal. When you drop that down into Christianity and say, okay, who do I want to win? And how am I going to do that? How can I become all things to all men? Paul shares 3 categories of people. And we're going to look at them quickly, and I'm going to come back to them. Number 1, he says he became a slave to the Jews. You see, that phraseology is another thing that we're a little uncomfortable with. Whoa, 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 whoa. I'm a slave to nobody. And then depending on your history, that term means so much more. Nobody's in charge of me. Nobody makes my choices for me. Paul says if you're going to follow Christ, you're going to have to decide on, I'm going to become a servant. I'm using the term slave because that's a biblical term. It means when an individual places themselves in subjugation to another individual, someone else is in charge of them. Someone else has the responsibility to help them make their choices. I am a slave to the Jews. Why? Well, in Paul's mind, if you look there again at 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 19, he says, to the Jews I became as a Jew that I might win the Jews. I have really wondered through the years and wrestled, is Paul saying this, and it's a cliche phrase that we've heard, when in Rome, be like the Romans. And there was a point in which I thought that was part of his argument. I want to be like them so they'll like me, and then I can persuade them. I'm not so sure that's his, and if you'll allow me a few minutes, I'll try to make sense of that, because he's here, if you'll remember, one of the great struggles in first century Christianity was the Jewish system. It was the seedbed for the Christian system. It was God's eternal plan, Old Testament. I want to show you that there is a system that no matter how intently you try to do it, you will fail miserably. I'm going to give you the detailed way to please me. I'm going to map it out for you. I'm going to give you days. I'm going to give you festivals. I'm going to show you sacrifices. If you want to know what's going to appease me, what's going to satisfy my wrath, what you can do when you've done wrong and make things right, then I'm going to give you that. And every year, the brook Kidron outside of Jerusalem ran red with the blood of the animals that were sacrificed. The smell, the stench of blood and death was in the air. The screaming of the various lambs and calves as they were slaughtered at the hands of individuals. Now, I'm just telling you what it was like there in the first century. That was a vivid image of you going to appease the wrath of God when sin, because sin is so evil to God, so opposed to who He is. So I'm going to give you a system. And so a group of individuals known as Jews, birth father of Abraham through into the system, I'm going to show you. And in that system, you do the sacrifices exactly as you're told, you worship me exactly as you're told, and you don't violate the commandments that I'm going to give you. Good luck with that. Some 2,000 plus years of a system and more, that finally, and that's what Paul will say later in the Galatian letter, this was a process to indicate to you, you cannot do it on your own. But at the height of Jesus' ministry was a group of individuals that had decided, oh yes, we can. We've figured this God thing out. We've got it down to a science. We've written a book, our own book. We know God gave us one, but we're going to write our own. It's called the Mishnah. We'll take the laws of God and we'll highlight and rationalize and make statements and say, we do all of these particular things. You got to be like us, and if you're like us, then God's going to like you. Well, That was Paul's attempt coming into the system, but to the Jews I'll become as a Jew. And what he meant by that was he was going to adhere to the law of God, not going to violate the law of God. But Jesus himself talked to the Pharisees, and that's a major league group that we're talking about here this morning, not just a small section of the Jews, but a significant section. And he said, try to the best of your ability to be right. You're going to fail in that, but when you try to, and in Matthew 23, if we had time, and we don't, but that's where Jesus finally comes to the last straw and says, all right, you try to do this, but you do this, and you don't do this. And he said it's all about your mindset, about being right instead of being righteous. And there's an incredible difference between those two. So he became a slave to the Jews. So Paul went out of his way to be biblical. And I'm talking Old Testament biblical here. To do those things that would be right. Then he goes next and says, I became a slave to the Gentiles. Now, time again is not going to allow to really develop this in its fullest sense. But what does that mean? Well, you've got the Jews. That was close. You've got the Jews who had the system. You've got the Gentiles who are outside of that system who the Jews hated. So you've got Paul saying, okay, I'm going to be like those who are outside of the law. And immediately those under the law say, well, how in the world, Paul, are you going to do that? Does that mean you're going to violate the law of God? He never said he was going to do that. It's not about that. But he said, I'm going to become what individuals need in their various situations. And when you look at the Gentiles, that doesn't mean he's going to start practicing idol worship. That doesn't mean he's going to start going to the idol temples and worshiping with them. But what he's going to do is he's going to say, well, there's a lot more about us that is alike than it is dislike. And that's why Paul made efforts to reach out to the Gentile population. In fact, he was the apostle to the Gentiles for the express reason, because he probably was more hated in one level by his own Jewish brethren. And that linked him in some way because of his life and the struggles that he had. When you look at several passages, look at Romans chapter 2. I'm going to just look at a couple in reference to this particular struggle with Paul. Romans 2 and verse 14. And Paul's trying to put this in Romans is a very, very intense look at that struggle. Verse 11, let's look at it first, because this is the whole thought of this process that he's become all things to all men. There is no partiality with God. Verse 11 in chapter 2 needs to be a verse that is highlighted, put all over the world. God sees us all the same. He says, there's no partiality with God. For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned in the law will be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are just in the sight of God, but the doers of the law will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these also, not having law, are a law to themselves. How do they do that? Who show their work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or else excusing them. Aren't you glad that God's going to hold us all to the same standard? Let that sink in for a minute. You're going, what do you mean by that? I just simply mean by that there is just one standard. The Bible. God's fair. And God's fair at a level that you and I can never comprehend. Because we're not fair. We have too many filters. We have too many experiences. We have too many judgments that cloud our fairness. Because if somebody's not like me, then they're not like me. You're going, whoa, that's deep. No, it's not. Because we like people like us. We have a tough time with people not like us. Just being honest with us. And in the middle of all of that struggle, God says, get over that. Because I like all of you. My intention is to save all of you. And there's a system in which he accomplishes that within his perfect, incredible will. And then the third group that he talks about, just because of time this morning, because I've got to get somewhere. He became a slave to the weak. There are those like us. There are those not like us. And then there are those that want to be like us. That's my unique way. I hope that makes sense. Because the weak are the individuals that want to do what God wants them to do, but don't know how. Either because they haven't been told, or because of difficulties that are beyond their control. The weak. Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, other passages, just note those, write them down. And Galatians 5:13 for a text and looking at this so I can get to a point. Galatians 5:13. Paul makes an observation in the middle of the struggle of trying to explain to us why Christ set us free and we need to live a particular way. We need to live in a free spirit. And in Galatians 5 he says, "For you, brethren, have been called to liberty." That's the freedom, free from all men. "Only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word." One word. All the law is fulfilled in one word. What is that one word? Well, some would say, well, it's law. Because if you've got to have a system where everybody can do the same thing, and then God awards us for doing the right thing. And that doesn't work. Because that was the Old Testament system. Nobody could do that. Well, maybe it's not law. Maybe it's just let us do whatever. Because that, in the world today, that pretty much is the overriding system. Well, if we just allow folks to do what they want to do, and as long as they're not bothering me and I'm not bothering them, we'll all get along and it'll be cool. That doesn't work either. Jesus introduced a word that he uses in Galatians 5. Even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love. That's the word. We'll be looking at that one eventually on Wednesday night. And it's such a powerful word. I saw it in one of its forms yesterday as I saw two people commit themselves to each other for the rest of their lives yesterday. Both of them wrote very neat personal vows to each other. Had the whole crew in tears. Because they were talking about a commitment to each other that went beyond just saying, I love you. It was a personal promise, and I'm going to do whatever you need, good and bad, sickness, health, rich or poor, as long as we both shall live. But love is that key capacity. Go to the next slide, Brett, please. I'm a servant to all. Because Jesus says, I've got to surrender to all. Wait, what do you mean? If I'm going to become all things to all men, that means I'm going to do whatever it takes. And that it's not about me. How do we get past our differences? We start realizing our similarities. And there's one glaring similarity that Paul knew about and that God knew about and that we should continually be, and that is the fact that every one of us are sinners. We've all either been forgiven or have the potential to be forgiven. And it is that capacity that God says, I want you to realize you've been put here for that particular purpose. As you look back in 1 Corinthians 9, as Paul makes the statement, he says that by some means save some. Not going to save everybody. But if our desire is not to save some, I am so amiss. I meant to do a moment of research before I got up here because I thought I'd remember it. But there was an individual, one of the officers in Houston, left his house last week, told his wife, in the middle of the storm, I've got to go because there are individuals that need help. Incredibly fortunate, I think, and fortunate is not the right word, for the catastrophe of the nature that it's been, for there not to have been more losses of life. One life lost is too many. But here is an individual, and a friend of mine put it better than I can put it. He said, he left house that morning with the intention to save as many as he could, and he lost his own life. But he couldn't not leave the house because it was just his DNA. The officer that was acknowledging his death said that was just his nature. He couldn't help but help. And I think that's the signature question we have to ask ourselves, no matter who it is, whether they're like me or not like me. My clarion call from the cross is forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. It's Jesus' words, not mine. Next slide. Does not mean compromise. To be all things to all men doesn't mean, well, I've got to do something wrong, or I've got to do something to me. It doesn't mean any of that. The person that made the greatest difference in the world, no matter who he was with, was himself. And he was true to God, and that's Jesus Christ. And as Dennis said during camp, I want to be like Jesus in the fact I want to be known as a friend of sinners. Not a judger of sinners. God does that. My job is to take the gospel to them that I might save some. I put this in a phrase and I hope it makes sense. Go to the next slide, Brim. We don't act one way with one group and another way with another group. And what I mean by that, if you'll remember in Galatians 2, when Paul withstood Peter to the face, Peter had been there, he'd been with the Gentiles, and he saw some of his Jewish buddies walk up and he walked away from the table because he was afraid of what they'd think about him. And Paul said, stop it. If you're going to genuinely be concerned about people, you shouldn't be concerned of who you're with or what somebody's going to say about you or think about you. Now, I know some of you are sitting there are verses just blasting through here. Avoid the very appearance of evil. Good, bad communications corrupt good morals. All those are accurate. But it's talking about my intentionality as well. Knowing full well. Now, my advocate, and I know some of the parents, are you advocating for my children to have relationships with individuals who are struggling? And you can't leave the world. Now, we've got to be careful. Wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But Jesus said the only way we're ever going to get to the sinners is if we're with the sinners. And in a way that shows them, my greatest concern about you is the struggle that you're having, not the sin that you're in. I'm not condoning that, but I want to help you get out of that. And I want to do whatever's necessary for you. That's what Paul said. Because I think the answer is this. We don't act one way with one group and another way with one group. We act like Christ with all groups. And it's in that moment that Jesus is seen. Becoming all things to all men does not mean compromise. God is calling us to surrender. Mark 8:35. Jesus said, and it starts in 34, but the gist is 35. When he called the people to himself with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, Jesus called it. Jesus walked the earth. His feet hit the dirty roads of Galilee and Jerusalem and all of those areas, and in the middle of a culture that was decadent and immoral. And he was known as a person who cared about people who were struggling. He said, but if you're ashamed of me, of him the Son of Man saw when he comes will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. I guess this is my question. Are there moments in our lives that the reason we're not doing what he wants us to do here is because we're ashamed of how we may appear? And we're more concerned about that than him being ashamed of us. All things to all men. Christ said he'll equip us. And it's about our heart. The church, his body, is about reaching into a lost world that desperately needs to see Jesus again. The one who showed up at places other people said, why are you there? Because the people there need me. What a great opportunity we have in this world to be Jesus to someone who needs to be saved. We can assist you in that this morning. Initial penitent faith, confession of Jesus as Lord, and baptism. Rededication to your relationship with him. Maybe there's something that you're tired of carrying around all by yourself, and that you need to share it with us so we can help you carry it. Any way we can be of assistance this morning, would you come as we stand and as we sing?